夠人又夠鐘啦，早。
We have already formed a quorum, and it's the appointed time. Let's call the meeting to order. We have 3 papers to discuss today. Before the meeting, the administration has submitted EC 2013-14-15 for circulation to members, and that paper sets out the changes in terms of the establishment for the directorate grade since 2002, and also the implication of the 3 papers on the establishment of the directorate grade. I'd like to remind members that if there is any direct or indirect pecuniary interest involved in the discussion of today's items, members are reminded to disclose them under Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure by disclosing the nature of such interest before they speak. And I'd also like to draw members' attention to Rule 84 with regard to the voting procedures on where there is any direct pecuniary interest involved. First paper, EC 2013-14-24, is a paper from the FSTB and is from the Financial Services Branch, and is to recommend that the supernumerary post for an Assistant Commissioner of Insurance be continued from May 25th, 2014 to the 31st of October 2015 in order to continue to perform the tasks of the new regulatory function stipulated in the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing financial institutions ordinance implemented since the 1st of April 2012, and the Mandatory Provident Fund Schemes Amendment Ordinance 2012 implemented since the 1st of November 2012. On the 6th of January this year, the Financial Affairs panel was consulted. With us today, Mr. Cheung, and also Ms. Nancy Qian, Assistant Commissioner of Insurance Enforcement from the FSTB, and Ms. Dari Lee is the Chairman of the FA panel. As she is not able to attend today's meeting, I'll be reporting on her behalf on the discussion or deliberation by the panel on that occasion. On the 6th of January this year, the administration consulted members on the proposed ESC paper. Members did not object to the administration's tabling the paper for the ESC to consider. Members made some inquiries with regard to the expiry date for keeping the supernumerary post, whether or not it would tie in with the future establishment timetable for the Independent Insurance Authority, and whether or not the post will be able to have proper division of labor with the staff of that authority. Members also discussed the division of labor between the proposed posts and also the joint financial intelligence units, anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist fundraising activities, and also the rules for reporting suspicious trade by the insurance industry, and also the number of complaints received by the authority with regard to MPF intermediaries, irregularities, and so on. We have Mr. Yu Si Weng, Mr. Felix Chong, and Mr. Sin Chung Kai who would like to ask questions. So, Mr. Yu Si Weng. Thank you, Madam Chair. All in all, I support this paper. I'd just like to know how come it was initially proposed for 2 years. Well, supposedly, if it's only for 2 years, probably is set up or is created for the purpose of enacting legislation and for the setting up of the insurance authority. And according to my experience, the administration should have known that 2 years should be enough, and now you're proposing to extend it by another 17 months. So would that be further extended after the expiry of the 17-month period, saying that you would like to extend it further? So can you give an undertaking that you will not be proposing for another extension after the expiry of the 17-month period? Mr. Chair, Thank you, Chairman. Before we created the post, one of the considerations was that we would be setting up the independent insurance authority, and after the establishment of the IA, this post will no longer be needed. That's why we have this timetable, because we thought that this post would then migrate to the new IA. Now the timetable has been postponed or delayed somewhat. So in the second quarter of this year, we'll be submitting the relevant legislation to this Council for passage. We hope that by the end of 2015, we would be able to set up the proposed insurance authority. That's the reason why we are proposing to extend it until the end of 2015. With regard to members' concerns, well, after the bill has been submitted to this Council, it would be out of our control as to how long it would take for this Council to scrutinize that bill. But then in any event, if there is a need to extend this post further, we'll be coming back to this Council. So that's for the continuity of the insurance authority. So for the incumbent filling the post, will he then be transferred to the new IA? Deputy Secretary. Well, for the regulatory functions, well, those will be taken up by the future IA. In other words, the post will last until the establishment of the IIA, and we may not be talking about the same person or individual taking up the post, because with the establishment of the IIA, there would be new functions. For example, for intermediaries, they have a self-disciplinary or regulatory function, but then in the future, there will be the statutory licensing system, which will be under the purview of the IIA, which will be responsible for issuing licenses to intermediaries. So we may not have the same individual filling the post. So there has been a delay, in a sense, of the establishment of the IIA, because initially you thought that it would take 2 years for you to establish the IIA. Now there is a delay by 17 months, and as you said, even after 17 months, there is no guarantee that the IIA can be set up. So in the process, has the administration looked into this? Why has there been this delay? Should somebody be made responsible for this? Well, in 2010, in the middle of 2010, we issue or publish the consultation paper on the proposal to set up the IIA, and then according to the views collected from the trade, with regard to certain major provisions, they asked us to consult the stakeholders and the trade again, and in the light of this request in 2012, concerning the main provisions of the bill, we consulted the public again, and for these main provisions, it took us some time to collate the views and discuss them with the sector. And in fact, last year, in the middle of last year, the outcome of the consultation was released, and as a result, the consultation took a bit longer than expected because of the suggestion from the industry. And in the second quarter of this year, we promised to submit the bill to this Council, and it's sometimes difficult for us to control the time that would be needed by this Council to scrutinize the bill. So it's not about the responsibility of any individual, because this is an interactive process. We have to respond to the aspiration of the trade. We also have to work hard enough to ensure that the trade would understand thoroughly the proposals made by us. That's why it took a bit longer. So, So how about tabling the legislation before this Council? Well, let me supplement. We hope that in the second quarter of this year, we'll be able to submit the bill before this Council. So according to your past experience, are you confident that 17 months would be enough for you to resolve the problems? Well, Madam Chair, after the bill has been tabled before this Council, it's difficult for us to control the progress. So it would depend on how this Council view the bill, whether or not there are many questions raised by members and so on. So this is our current estimate. It's difficult for us to come up with an undertaking saying that it would take how many months for this bill to get passed in this Council. Mr. Felix Chung. Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the Assistant Commissioner of Insurance, his main duties would be anti-money laundering and also the regulatory function of the MPF intermediaries. So I'd like to know with regard to the intermediaries of MPF and also anti-money laundering, what is the commonality between the two functions? Yes, well, for the anti-money laundering legislation in April 2012, it came into effect. As regards the MPF schemes intermediaries regulation, well, that started in November last year, or that started in November 2012. But then, for the regulatory authority, the powers given to us would be to conduct field inspection and also our checking up of the documentation to see if they comply fully with the requirements. And we also have to make sure that they do discharge their duties on due diligence for client check. And also with regard to MPF intermediaries, we also have to find out whether or not they have followed the conduct requirements or integrity requirements, so that when they give advice to their clients, whether or not they are fully compliant with the requirements. So our responsibilities is to whether or not they can comply with the relevant legislation and the conduct requirement, and also where there is full compliance, we would also have to undertake investigation work if there are complaints. So these are the main duties of the incumbent. And also under the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing Ordinance, or the AMLO, the authority has powers to punish, and where necessary, he can also take up prosecution. And under the MPF Ordinance, well, that's for the MPF authority to do it. So, in other words, the Assistant Commissioner will be undertaking both tasks. It doesn't mean that there is any commonality between the two functions. No. And for the insurance sector, where there is any money laundering, is the current situation very serious? That's why we have to have a dedicated commissioner to oversee that. So what's the background to this? Well, the background to this is that, well, there is an international organization coming up with various recommendations, and all signatories or member states will have to comply with them. And according to our assessment in 2011, there were guidelines, but then there wasn't any legislation to compel compliance. That's why we had to introduce this legislation in order to enhance compliance. And where the legislation is enacted, we will have to enforce it. So that's the background to this. We have to comply with the international standards. And with the implementation of this piece of legislation and other initiatives towards the end of 2012, after our assessment, we have already met the requirements. You also referred to the insurance industry, whether or not there are very serious problems of irregularities. Well, they can use insurance as a tool to launder money. For example, they can charge a very high premium for an insurance policy, and then within a very short space of time, they'll be able to realize that money, and that would become legitimate. And also, they can also take out an insurance policy, and they can also increase the coverage, and then within a very short space of time, it can become mature, so that the client can also withdraw the money. So they can always ask the insurance agency to return or reimburse them. So whether or not the insurance agency is aware of the background of the client, and also whether or not the insurance policy that he takes out is in line with his financial position, and so on. So these are the duties of the authority to find out. No further questions. Mr. Sin Chung Kai, I do not have any qualm about the paper. I support the proposal to set up and maintain this post.
Just a comment. It appears that the administration is rather optimistic as to the passage of the bill as scheduled, because you want to have it passed by the end of this year, and yet the bill will only be presented in the second quarter. I remember when we examined MPF-related legislation, it took quite a while. Of course, the MPF system was more complicated. Contributions are required, but anyway. Next year, perhaps you have to come again to extend the post again. To spare yourself the trouble, perhaps you should have extended it by another additional half year. But it's good that you are so optimistic, but I'm afraid you have to come back. You're quite likely that you have to come back. Any response, please? Thank you, Mr. Sin, for your reminder. I think this is different from the establishment of other regulators. Now we are amending the insurance legislation for the establishment of the OCI. And we are talking about the monitoring of insurance companies to ensure their financial soundness. So I think these are rather general provisions, and the more complicated thing is the licensing scheme of intermediaries. So I think we have less work to do when it comes to the when compared with the establishment of other regulatory bodies. However, we appreciate Mr. Sin's reminder, and we will double our efforts to ensure that the body can be set up as soon as possible to protect the interests of policyholders. Well, if Mr. Sin has no further questions, I have one to ask. I'd like to follow up on the question asked by Mr. Chung Kwok Pen. All right, the commissioner, the assistant commissioner explained to us how people can take out insurance for money laundering. I'd like to know whether this is common in Hong Kong or not. Well, after they have done the relevant checking and kept records. Now, if they are of the view that a certain client is suspicious, the company can choose not to accept the business, or if the policy is already taken out, then there should be continued supervision or monitoring. Insurance organizations under the legislation are required to report suspicious transactions for analysis, and then such intelligence will be analyzed. So this is under the police, and after conducting an internal analysis, the police will carry out the necessary investigations. Well, under the anti-money laundering legislation, what the intermediaries are required to do is due diligence and to report suspicious transactions. Thank you. All right. If members have no further questions, I'll put this item to the vote. For those who are in favor of EC 2013-14-24 and the proposals therein, hands up, please. Those who are against, please raise their hands. I think members voting on this item are in general supportive of the paper, so the recommendation is endorsed. Do we require split voting at FC? No. Thank you very much. Well, we move on to the next item from the Housing Department, paper EZ 2013-14-25. The HD proposes to create 3 permanent posts: 1 chief architect at D1, 1 chief structural engineer at D1, and also 1 chief engineer at D1 to cope with the increase in workload arising from the new public housing production targets, and for the administration and implementation of housing-related infrastructural projects under Capital Works Reserve Fund Head 711. On the 6th of January, the administration consulted the Housing Bureau of the Council, and present for this item we have Mr. Duncan Pascott, Permanent Secretary for Transport and Housing, and Ms. Ada Fung, Deputy Director of Housing. Chairman of the Housing Panel, Mr. Wong Kwok Heng, is not a member of this subcommittee, nor can he attend this morning's meeting. So I will briefly report to you the deliberations of the Housing Panel. According to a note prepared by the Secretariat, the Housing Bureau discussed the proposals on the 6th of January this year, and members have no objection to recommending this paper to the SC for consideration. Some members note that since 2012, the Housing Department has already created 8 directorate posts for dealing with new workload associated with the construction of PRH and HOS. So some members asked whether there is room for the number of new posts to be reduced. According to the administration, when the Bureau merged with the department in 2022, 15 directorate posts were deleted. In order to cope with the additional workload associated with increased production of PRH and resumption of HOS, the HD has to boost their professional staff so as to meet the housing production targets. Since different professions have different roles to play, and therefore the posts cannot be merged. The explanation was noted by members. Mr. Chung Kwok Pan, Dr. Kwok Kai-ki, Mr. Poon Siu Ping, and Mr. Sin Chung Kai have indicated the intention to ask questions. Any more? If not, 5 minutes each. Mr. Chung Kwok Pan. Thank you, Chairman. The administration is going to greatly boost its PRH and HOS production. I understand that manpower is needed, and some directorate posts are created. Well, they are generals. Still, you need soldiers. With so many new directorate officers, I'm sure they're going to recruit more non-directorate staff to assist. Para 11 or Para 24 says that the HD is going to create 140 non-direct civil service posts. I'd like to know whether they have authority for that already. Yes?
Madam Chairman, yes. In fact, we have got authority to create the posts. We're now going through the process to do that creation through our internal Departmental Establishment Committee process. So the recruitment is now underway.
All right, you're already creating these posts. I'd like to know whether you are going to to recruit from outside your department. If yes, you will be doing it from the private market, right?
It'll be a mix, actually, because some are more senior posts, so there'll be promotions. Some are direct entry posts, and they'll be recruited. They may not be from the private sector. We take people from all over, so we may take them from other departments, for example. So we will be recruiting, but we will also be promoting.
But can you tell me roughly how many of the 140 posts will be recruited from the private sector?
I can actually give you a rough number. It probably around 30% would be from outside. It may not be from the private sector, as I say. We look to get experienced people to come in who have already been working in relevant areas. So we may look, and in the past we've recruited from other government departments, for example, or other agencies, MTRC, URA, Housing Society. We look for all sources from all different areas, not just from the private sector.
My question is, well, according to the PS, they might be recruiting from other government bodies. I don't know whether it is by secondment or what, but you then we'll be taking away manpower from these departments, and these agencies or the private sector will face manpower tightness. Whether we talk about large-scale infrastructure projects or private projects, there are numerous. So if you recruit from other departments, where do they find the staff to fill the vacancies? Probably from elsewhere. So you're competing for manpower. So this can be a serious problem.
Of course we're competing. We're competing with everybody in the industry. And as members are well aware, there are shortages in the industry as a whole. This is one of the biggest challenges that we face. For our entry, they tend to be the younger people, so we can recruit some from universities and some from people who are just starting out in the industry. But for more experienced staff, you have to look at the existing people available in the industry and across government and across the other agencies. So yes, I'm afraid we are competing with everybody else.
Chairman, so this is where the problem lies. Even the PS admitted that that's a big challenge. There is shortage of manpower. And when the PS was here last time, I asked a similar question. For the construction of PRH and infrastructure, even construction workers are short. I understand that there is manpower shortage. This is a stiff challenge. But what are the solutions? You have not proposed any solutions.
Madam Chairman, in fact, we have been working with the Construction Industry Council, Development Bureau and other agencies to look at increasing the manpower in the industry as a whole through training and through other options. At the moment, of course, there is a bit of a debate about whether there should be the importation of labour for some sectors in the industry. That's another option. But at the moment, I think the priority, as far as we're concerned, is we want to train up the people in Hong Kong that should be getting these jobs. And that's where the emphasis should be.
Chairman, of course, I am more for recruiting local professionals or laborers first. However, given the sheer amount of infrastructure projects and PRH program we have, the government cannot drag its feet anymore. That is about importation of labor. Thank you, Mr. Chung. Dr. Kwakaki. Madam Chair. Of course, people who are waiting for PRH would like to see the production boosted. We have no reasons to object the proposed creation of posts here. The question is whether giving them the new posts will ensure that they deliver the targets is worrying. Paragraph 4 says that in 2014's policy address, the administration has increased substantially to a yearly average of 25,000 units, 20,000 PRH units, 8,000 PRH and 8,000 28,000 PRH and 8,000 HOS units respectively. The question is, the administration usually cannot deliver the targets. And then in 4 years' time, from 2016, we can only have 17,000 per units per year. And then after that, there can be more supply. So you come here for more new staff, but after that, you usually cannot meet the targets. So for the new 3 posts, after they are created, can they help you to realize your targets? And I think this briefing was given to us before the policy address. Does that mean that you have to create more posts later? We have given you so many new people. Of course, we cannot cut them if you cannot deliver your targets. I want you to achieve your targets over 100%. But have you taken into account the new undertakings by CY Leung in the latest policy address? Because we don't want you to come back and ask for more people. And Mr. Chung Kwok Pan asked a very good question. He asked whether importation of labor is needed. We don't want to see that. I'd like to know whether with all your directorate establishment and non-directorate establishment, you'll be able to deliver the targets promised by CY Leung. Now, recently, there is a new undertaking from the government, and that is redevelopment of old PRH estates. Have you taken into account the manpower required for that?
Chairman, yes. 3 points there. First, of course, the whole objective is to deliver on the targets. But the target delivery depends on 3 factors. The first factor, and most important, is land supply, which I can't control. Second factor is the money supply to be able to put the money in for the investment purposes. That we're already working on with FSTB. The third one, and the most important one for today, is the manpower. Of course, what we're trying to do here is to structure ourselves so that we have the manpower to deliver on the numbers, and that's the purpose of this submission. This submission, as we've made clear in the paper, is based on the 20,000 plus 5,000 projection that was pre-2014 policy address. We will now be studying what the additional manpower requirement, if any, will be for the additional 3,000 units that, of HOS. Now, the reason that I'm a little bit uncertain about this is because we have a number of options for that extra 3,000 HOS requirement. One of which is to outsource more of the production to the private sector, because at the moment the planning is that we should be able to produce all of this using our own resources. But the additional should allow us the opportunity to outsource. And this is indeed in line with the recommendations set out in the Long-Term Housing Strategy Steering Committee report. So we're looking at that option to allow us to accommodate the additional demand from government. As far as this is concerned, these posts are required to ensure that we can produce the 20,000 plus 5,000, and with this we should be able to do that if we get the land.
主席，咁我想知而家。
Madam Chair, then I'd like to know for the extra 3,000, when will the administration be able to come up with a more specific decision as to what it is going to do? Nobody would mind if you adopt the second approach. That is, you will have to work in conjunction with the private sector and developer, but then you will have to be extremely careful about the pricing and so on, or else you will be criticized, because in the past you've been criticized by the others. And the Permanent Secretary also talked about funding, and I've also noticed that there might be a problem. So is the HA being subject to a very serious problem of funding shortage? We will have to be very careful about this, or else the administration might be saying that it would like to produce more, but then if you are not doing the right thing, then we are very concerned.
I can assure members that, and the public generally, that we have the resources at the moment that will keep us going for the current production for the next 5 years. That is not the problem. We're starting this discussion with government on the future funding because we anticipate the situation. Now, there are many uncertainties. For example, if the number of HOS units produced can be sold at a reasonable price, that will help us to offset the funding requirements, because that money comes back to the Housing Authority. All of this will be studied, and we have started those discussions with financial services and the Treasury. And indeed, as members will be well aware, the Financial Secretary in his recent budget made it very clear this discussion will be ongoing over the next year or so. A couple of other points that I think I should pick up on, taking into account this issue of how we might outsource. I think that the Honourable Member is absolutely right. If we're going to go down that route, we need to maintain quality and the standards of production. We need to ensure that we can ensure that the production is delivered on time, because that's absolutely critical, and of course the price. But the price, as far as the buyer is concerned, is set in accordance with the established principles related to affordability, and that's the approach. Regardless of the cost of the production, that's the way the price is set for home ownership scheme units.
Next, Poon Xiu Ping. Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to PRH production, if you look at the quantity, is quite large, and you also have the 10-year production target. In principle, I have no objection whatsoever to creating these posts in order to cope with the workload. But when you look at the paper, in the past, the HD and HA had this restructuring, and then for the directorate post, it dropped from 70 plus to 40 plus, and now you're proposing to increase the number to 60 plus. So I'd like to look at the overall establishment over for the 10-year period. You should have an estimate that is from directorate post to the general establishment. So you should have done an estimate, and as you just said, well, there might be a tightness of manpower in the private sector, and you would also have difficulties recruiting, and therefore some of the work might have to be outsourced. But then in terms of the management of the completed units, I think the administration should be doing it itself instead of outsourcing it to the private sector. So I'd like to ask, well, for the next 10 years, have you conducted any assessment on the manpower arrangement? Permanent Secretary.
We have embarked on a review of our manpower requirement. For the whole department, we're starting with the Development and Construction Division. We've in the process of appointing consultants to help us with that program. Once we've completed that part of the exercise, we'll then move on to the estate management side, and then the ICU and the other bits and pieces of the department. That process is underway. What we've done so far in terms of coming up with these numbers are looking specifically at the requirements related to the production side. But of course the department has a much wider remit, and we need to look across the whole department. One of the things that I think the honourable members picked up on is the balance of outsourcing to in-house management of our existing public rental housing estates, and that's one of the issues that will be looked at in due course. At the moment, it's about 60% outsourced to the private sector management companies, 40% direct management by the housing department staff. We think that's probably about right, but we want to look at it from an objective point of view to say, is that still providing us with the skill set to be able to manage the new estates, the new facilities that new estates take on? So this is something we're looking at.
So when will your review be completed according to your estimate?
At the moment, we're asking for the consultants to come back with recommendations in about 4 months, and then we'll have a look at it internally. Then we're going to use that to have some discussions with Civil Service Bureau and Financial Services and the Treasury Bureau, and then we'll obviously have to consult the Housing Authority. So this process for the first stage of this exercise will probably take us some sort of 6 to 8 months.
All right. Next, Sin Chung Kai. Thank you, Madam Chair. Some technical issue, Para 28. Para 28. About the background. There you said that some architects, note 9. So you have an independent auditing unit, or ICU. So what's the current arrangement? Because in my days as a member of the HA, or for projects undertaken by the HD, you didn't have to go through the ASD. So what's the current arrangement? Does it have to be vetted by the ASD, or would you be doing that internally? The
internal checking unit actually has delegated authority from the Buildings Department. So it's nothing to do with architectural services. These are about building safety standards, clearance of plans, looking at vetting applications for modifications, for example, for home ownership scheme projects and TPS estates, our commercial facilities and what have you. They also have a small independent audit unit which carries out internal audits on our activities. The ICU reports direct to me, and the whole purpose is to give us this ability to carry out the inspections and vetting that needs to be done in accordance with the Buildings Ordinance.
I hope I've understood it correctly. So for the architects that would be that would go back to your department, then would it mean that there would be shortage of manpower for the ICU?
Members last year approved the creation of an additional post for the ICU, and we took back the post that was on loan, and that's the way we've covered it. So the ICU currently has its full staff complement.
So you've seconded staff to it, and they've returned them to you.
When we created this unit, we had to use the staff that we had within the department. But as I said, last year we successfully secured a post through the resource allocation exercise, and of course that meant we could free up the posts that came back.
So you are actually increasing production and you have to increase manpower, and we supported you. So by the time when you're able to produce those units, so for the ICU, will they also be increasing the number of inspectors in order to tie in with your new production target, so that they'll be able to audit the completed units? Because a number of years ago you did have the short pile incident. So as the Buildings Department has given you the authority to do the internal checking. All right, you've got the people. So are you able to increase the number of people for the ICU?
I said last year we did create additional posts for ICU, both at the directorate and the non-directorate staff, so that we have already established what we think is the appropriate level of manpower in that unit. Just to give you the specifics, we created one chief structural engineer, one chief maintenance surveyor post at the directorate level, plus supporting staff. So, as I say, we believe that currently they should be sufficient to be able to take on the task of, and let me stress this, the 20,000 plus 5,000. Whether we need additional staff to do the extra 3,000 is something we still have to look at. But at the moment, we have the staff in ICU. We believe they're currently structured appropriately.
One additional question for the ICU now. Correct me if I'm wrong. So the Buildings Department has authorized it to do the job, but then it's still under you, right? So they are still under you. So have they given you any independent suggestion whether or not they have sufficient staff?
The situation is that they operate under delegated authority from the Director of Buildings. That's the structural arrangement. They work very closely with Buildings Department. So, for example, if Buildings Department comes out with new guidelines, they automatically apply through the ICU to our housing authority projects as well. So that relationship exists. In looking at the ICU staffing requirements, of course, as part of our dialogue with Buildings Department, we have spoken to them. They have accepted that the arrangements that we have in place are acceptable to them to allow us to enforce the Buildings Ordinance under the delegated authority.
Any further questions from members? If there are no further questions, then I'll put this to the vote. Will those in favor of EC 2013-14-25, please raise their hands. Those against, please raise their hands. No objection. I think majority of the members present and voting are in favor, so the item is approved. So is there any suggestion that this paper be singled out for separate voting at the FC meeting? Mr. Chung, you'd like to have it singled out for separate voting? All right. Please note that, THB. All right, thank you very much. Next, EC 2013-14-26 is an item from the HAB, and is to create a supernumerary post in the HAB at D2 for a period of 2 years to take charge of the detailed planning of the Kai Tak multi-purpose sports complex, and to conduct a comprehensive policy review on private recreational leases or PRLs. And to answer questions, we have Mr. McKinney, Deputy Secretary for Home Affairs, and Ms. Patty Lai, Principal Assistant Secretary for Home Affairs, Recreation and Sport. As Mr. Ma Fong Kwok, Chairman of the HA panel, is not a member of this subcommittee, and he's also not able to attend today's meeting, in accordance with the information prepared by the Secretariat, I'll be setting out in brief the deliberation by the HA panel. The HA panel on the 10th of January and the 17th of February of this year discussed the proposal by the administration to create an AOSGC post at D2 for a period of 2 years who is responsible for the detailed planning of the Kai-Tak multipurpose sports complex, and also to conduct a comprehensive policy review on private recreational leases. Members in general supported the proposal, but then some members suggested that the administration should consider redeploying the duties of other AOSGC posts within the Treasury Bureau, so that one of the directorate AOs will be responsible for sports policy and also responsible for steering the policy of the MPSC. The administration indicated that there is a section within the Bureau responsible for that, and is headed by an AOSGB, and also is supported by an AOSGC. And the administration did consider whether or not the other 7 directorate grade officers should also take up the duties of the proposed supernumerary posts. But then, as these staff are also responsible for a number of policy issues, and if they have to take on the additional tasks without affecting their own work operationally, it would not be feasible.
First, I have to declare interest. A member of 2 private recreational clubs, and therefore I have conflict of interest in review of PRL, so I will not ask questions. Also refrain from voting. Members from questions from members. Mr. Chung Kwok Pan and Mr. Sin Chung Kai. Anyone more? Mr. Yu Shiwing. All right, Mr. Chung Kwok Pan. Thank you. In Annex 2 of the paper, or enclosure to the paper, with the job description of the PAS, point 2, to provide policy input and strategic analysis in relation to the development of the project and to identify possible obstacles. I'd like to know what obstacles are foreseen at this moment. And secondly, the chairman referred to a comprehensive policy review on PRLs. I'd like to know when that review will be completed. And I'll have one more question to ask later.
Thank you for the question. The review of the private recreational leases is already underway. However, in order to make good progress with this, obviously we're asking for additional support at the directorate level. Our intention is for the review to come up with some preliminary recommendations before the end of this year. However, given the fact that we're reviewing 69 different private recreational leases of different clubs and organisations of widely differing natures, it is quite a time-consuming and potentially complex task. So I think that the best we can say at this stage is that we will have some preliminary ideas about the way in which that review is going by the end of this year, by the end of 2014. In terms of the development of the Kai-Tak sports complex and some of the potential obstacles that we see with that, I think a lot of these relate to the procurement strategy. This is a very large project. It is, in some respects, in terms of the procurement, quite a complex project. We'll be looking very likely to operate a design, build and operate approach to this project, which is something that will require a great deal of preparation, both in terms of the technical specifications but also in terms of the long-term operating specifications. Other issues that will arise, we foresee arising, relate to the interface with other projects, other infrastructure projects at the Kai-Tak development. There will be a number of other projects actually taking place at the same time, in particular projects such as the Central Kowloon route, the Sha Tin to Central MTR link, and also the environmentally friendly transport link. All those will have a direct bearing on the project program for the Kai-Tak Sports Complex. So I think it's very important that we can identify these potential issues at an early stage and at a suitably senior level and deal with these in consultation with other departments and outside organisations.
Thank you. Another question is, this PAS will oversee sports policy. Now, it's just been reported that for the Winter Olympics, an athlete from Hong Kong complained that there was no sports doctor, medical doctor to accompany the delegation. There was no team doctor, and was found that in the budget a team doctor was provided, and yet the Olympic Committee in Hong Kong did not do that. So will this PAS monitor funding to such organizations? Anyone?
I think for the post that we're proposing to create today, the time-limited post, the focus for that particular officer will be very much on the delivery of the Kai Tak Sports Complex project and also on the review of the private recreational leases. However, the current directorate officer in the Bureau will accordingly have more time to devote to issues such as that which you've raised. In particular, we will be looking at strengthening support for not just elite athletes at the Sports Institute, but cases such as the one you've raised, where we have elite athletes in potentially less advanced sports, shall we say, or minority sports, and looking at ways in which we can provide greater support for athletes and for these sports as a whole. And that will rest with the existing officer, who will then be able to spend correspondingly more time on developing the policy in that area.
Okay.
Mr. Sin Chung Kai. Thank you. I'm not very confident with this post. Because you have been criticized by the Audit Commission for the way you handled private recreational treaties. And now, I think what Mr. Kwokaki said in the previous paper will apply here. We are afraid that even if we give you the new post, you cannot complete your review of all the PRLs, because you still have 50-odd leases yet to be renewed. So it depends on whether you have the teeth. And you know, these private recreational clubs are financially very strong, and they may take you to the court. I'm afraid that even with a new post, do you have money to go into court cases with them? Well, they don't need to do that. The DFJ can give them non-cash limited support.
I think that was perhaps more of a comment than a question, but I would certainly emphasize that yes, you cannot expect the creation of this post on its own to ensure that there will be a total overhaul of the policy. However, we do need this post created in order to go through the processes that have been firmly recommended by the Director of Audit, that we should start this review and that we should conduct it in a thorough manner. There are a number of recommendations that came through in the report from the Director of Audit and from the PAC, the Public Accounts Committee. And we do need somebody at directorate level who can focus on these issues and conduct the review. Whether or not this review does result in a major overhaul is going to be a matter for future discussion, but the review does need to be done, and we do need this directorate level support in order to make sure it's done in a fair and thorough manner.
Well, just a word of advice. Well, a century or so ago, for PRLs, our population was much smaller. There might be still land for private recreational clubs for people to engage in sports they like. That was a good thing. But nowadays, when it comes to the operation of these leases, you may want them to open up their facilities, but members may resist it. They have to pay millions of dollars to join the clubs, and if members of the public can use the facilities for free, I'm afraid they might have some psychological obstacles. However, you've allowed them to be closed to the public, then no, I think they are required to pay a nominal rent of $1. And if you charge them land premium, the situation may be different. So I think the government is faced with a dilemma, a very difficult situation. These clubs would object very severely, and there are also strong views from the community because people are given land at such a low premium, and yet they're able to enjoy such a spacious facilities, and Hong Kong people cannot use the facilities. If you force them to open up, they may resist. So it's very difficult for the government to act. I hope the administration can respect the views of the Audit Commission and the public. Any response, please?
That we will take very, very close guidance from the Audit Commission's recommendations and the recommendations of the Public Accounts Committee when taking forward this review.
Mr. Yu Siwing, thank you. The new posts have two things to do. We know that the Kai Tak multi-sports complex is of a very large scale, and then it will be run on a design, operate, build and operate model, and then the staff member responsible will have to consult different parties. So the period is only for 2 years. Would that be enough? Will you have to come back and extend the post? If yes, for how long? I don't know whether the administration has considered thoroughly the total time required for the delivery of the project.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a very, very good question, and we thought very carefully about this. According to our current projected timetable for this project, we're looking at construction work actually beginning in 2016. So that's roughly 2 years from now. For the intervening 2-year period, we can see a very, very clear need for this additional directorate support within the Bureau to work on the detailed planning and on the preparation for the tendering and or the operating specifications for this project. Beyond that, we cannot see at this moment a clear need for that level of policy input at the directorate level on top of what we already have within the Bureau. Bear in mind that the officer in question will not be operating alone. We also have a team that will be working under her, including senior architectural and engineering support from within the government. We also expect to engage some consultancy resources to help on drawing up the operating specifications. And of course, within the Architectural Services Department itself, there will be technical advice on a lot of the pre-construction issues. And we are planning to come back to the Public Works Subcommittee towards the end of this year to seek funding for the initial pre-construction works, which will involve a lot of technical consultancies. However, in the coming 2 years, the problem that we face is that we need the extra level of policy input at the Bureau level to ensure that we can put together the operating specifications, bearing in mind the needs of the sports community and the wider community. Also ensure good coordination of the preparation of all the tendering issues and the contract procurement issues. And as well as that, we need to coordinate properly the public consultation and the awareness raising of what this project is going to be about. So we can see a very, very clear need within the next 2 years. Beyond that, I think at this moment the picture is not clear, but we will be reviewing whether or not we need to renew this post towards the end of that 2-year period.
Well, you really have to review that within the 2-year period, because I expect that the post might be extended for another 2 years and yet another 2 years. There will be problem with the continuity of work of the incumbent officer concerned. So you should let us know very clear whether there is any need for the post to continue, so that next time you won't just ask for a 2-year extension. You should have some long-term view. Now, regarding the PRLs, you have to complete the renewal arrangement of the remaining PRLs, and after that, who will take over the duties, and what about the monitoring?
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, that's also a very good question. The main focus of the work for this particular additional directorate post would be on the review. The review itself is something that will be very, very time-consuming, given the very varying nature of the lessees. However, once the review is complete and we have a clear way forward, then I think the day-to-day work, if you like, the regulatory work involved in overseeing these lessees can revert back to the Bureau. We are actually using some existing internal resources within the Bureau, some experienced officers who are currently already working on the issue of private recreational leases, and they will join the team that is led by this Directorate officer during the review period. And these people will then continue afterwards to help with the oversight and the regulation of the lessees to ensure compliance with any new conditions that may come out of the review. However, the big sort of lump, if you like, of work is going to be the review, and that is what creates the extra manpower requirement in the next 2 years.
Okay. Yes. Any further questions, members? Before I put the issue to the vote, is there any declaration of interest by members for membership of any private recreation clubs? I've already declared that. Mr. Chung, you don't have to declare. All right, I'll put it to the vote then. For those in favor of EC 2013-14-26, please raise their hands. Again, those against, please raise their hands. I think majority of the members are in favor. Is there any need for this paper to be singled out for voting at the FC meeting? No? Okay, so paper approved. Thank you. AOB, I've only got one thing to ask government officials here. Last year, we approved the 2 posts for the ministerial meeting of APEC. So as APEC is not going to be held here, so what's going to happen to those 2 posts? According to the standing practice, if those posts are not needed, then those posts would not be created. But then back then, we made the suggestion because there was an operational need for those posts to be created. That's why we made the suggestion. But then as far as the FSTP is concerned, our officials have told us that with regard to the funding and also the posts, the funds would not be used and the posts would not be created. But then since that's been budgeted already, so what happens is that that would go back to the reserve. Mr. Yu, Madam Chair, just now we heard that they have not used the funds at all. But then how about other funding? Would that be used? For example, they would have to engage some consultancy work, and they would also have to make some preparation for that. So is it that not a single cent has been spent on that? We will have to go back and check because, well, the budget just made a suggestion a short while ago, and we haven't really scrutinized it, and we haven't got the funding at all. But then, according to my understanding, we haven't really reached the start of the new financial year, and that's why those funds have not been used at all. But then I think those posts have been approved. So have those posts been filled already? Well, yes, the posts have been filled, but then according to my understanding, the entire team will lapse. So the entire team will disband shortly. So it shouldn't have been a very large team in the first place. Okay, so can you give us a very simple paper to set out the details as to how those people would be redeployed and what happens to the resources? Could it be a situation whereby the resources might be spent without our knowing? All right. Without further ado, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.